Hello lovely people and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be ranking my McGrath eyeshadow palettes. I've seen other people do this video and I'm absolutely addicted to watching them because I think it's just so much fun to see how everyone ranks their eyeshadow palettes, their reasoning, and just to see how everyone's taste is so different. So with that being said, I have a lot of McGrath eyeshadow palettes because I love her eyeshadow formula. If you're new to my channel, hello, I'm Mariam. I am pretty much addicted to McGrath and her makeup brand. It would be a blatant lie for me to say that I am objective when it comes to McGrath makeup. I don't think I can be objective anymore because I absolutely love everything that she has ever made and I've very few criticisms of her makeup. We have a lot of eyeshadow palettes to go through and I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm actually just going to jump right into it. Enjoy! The way I'm going to do this ranking video is in an ascending order, meaning that I'm going to start with my lowest ranked McGrath palette and then we're going to count down to my absolute favorite McGrath palette. Now keep in mind, lowest in my ranking does not mean that I don't like it, that I in any way regret having it. Like I mentioned in my intro, I adore every single McGrath item that I own, and the only reason I'm ranking it lowest is because we're doing a ranking video and someone just needs to be at the bottom. So at the bottom of my ranking list is the La Vie and Rose palette, which is one of her original six-pan palettes. This is the mini Subversive, which is why it also comes in the respective Subversive packaging. Now, the reason I rank this palette the lowest is because, to be quite honest with you, this color story is not my color story. It's just not... rosy and like pinky purpley tones are really not my thing, but I like individual shades in here. Now, the only shade I really don't like, I just don't vibe with this shade is this one here. It's the hot pink. I don't like the texture, I don't like the undertone because I feel like it clashes with my undertones. I do, however, really like all of the metallics in this eyeshadow palette, in particular the purple, the gold, and this gorgeous shade here, Pale Fire, which is one of my favorite shades from McGrath. So La Vie and Rose was number 16 in my countdown. Number 15 goes to the Metalmorphosis six-pan palette. This was one of her Opulence 2018, so holiday collection for 2018 palettes. And I love this eyeshadow palette actually. I'm ranking it in number 15 because it's mostly an eyeshadow palette that I reach for individual shades rather than to do something with all of the shades in here. I have done really beautiful looks using all of the shades in here, but most of the time I will go into this palette for individual shades. I will go in for this beautiful shade here, which is one of the most unique neutrals that I have. I will go in for Gold Standard because Gold Standard is such a gorgeous vibrant gold. Also the bronze, the orange, because I don't really do full looks with this palette. I rank it relatively low, although if I speak again about individual shades, some of these are amongst my favorites. At number 14 you will be surprised to see the Nocturnal Nirvana quad, which is from her Opulence 2019 collection, so last year's holiday collection. And the reason I think you will be surprised that I'm ranking this relatively low is because theoretically this is a very me color story. There is a blue, there is a green, there is a gorgeous purple. However, when I look at this gold, it's like a sore in my eye. I just don't like this gold with this eyeshadow palette. I think it has no place in here. I would have much rather preferred one of her astral shades with a little bit of a green shift to it. I think that would have made so much more sense with this color story. That being said, this green is one of the most beautiful eyeshadows I have ever seen in my life. At number 13 we have another one of her Opulence 2018 six-pans, and this is the Bronze Temptation six-pan. Again, really beautiful eyeshadow palette. Actually, the color story is also the epitome of Christmas, so if you think about holidays, this is probably the best representation of holiday colors ever. This shade here, I don't know whether you're going to be able to see it. That's the shade Corruption. It kind of has a little bit of a multi-chrome thing going on to it because it shifts from a burgundy to a gold to a thick green. It's beautiful. Another shade that I really love in here, and I don't know whether you can see it. Do you see the dent I already have in this shade? This turquoise greenish shade. This shade is gorgeous. It has the most beautiful sparkle to it. It looks so rich and deep on the lids. The reason I'm ranking this palette a little bit lower is because sans these two shades, this palette is not really a very exciting color story. Although I have to say I do reach for it a lot to use the two matte browns, because these two matte browns have a little bit of warmth to them and they fit very well with my skin tone. So it's a very practical palette, but just overall it doesn't get me overly excited. At number 12 we have another one of her quads that she released last year. This is the Ritualistic Rose quad, which looks like this. I actually really like this eyeshadow palette. It's beautiful, it's so girly, it's so feminine. A bit of a personal preference, but I would have preferred if this shade had a little bit of a stronger base to it, because it's a pink with a golden flip to it, but the pink is very subtle and it's almost like you have to layer it over something really pink to get the pink, which shifts into a gold. If you use it on its own, you mostly see the gold shift rather than the pink, and that's something that I just would have preferred to be a little bit different. Again, there's a gold. This purple here is really, really gorgeous. This bronzy brown, very beautiful, very fitting with my skin tone. Overall, a very beautiful palette. I don't reach for it very often, and when I do reach for it, it's mostly for the topper shade over here. But it is still a very beautiful release. If you want to try only the special formula from Pat McGrath and you don't care so much for her like mattes or her regular metallics, in quads are probably the perfect entry, the perfect way to get yourself familiarized with her special formulas. So Ritualistic Rose was number 12. At number 11 we have one of her limited edition Star Wars palettes. This is the, I want to call it the Dark Star, no, it's called the Dark Galaxy eyeshadow palette. I really, really love this palette. The reason I'm ranking it a little bit lower is because as we are getting up in the ranking, we are getting closer towards the big Mothership palettes, and I really cannot put any of my 6 pans together with the Mothership palettes, because I love the Mothership palettes more than my 6 pans. That is just life. I do really, really like this eyeshadow palette. I love every single shade in here. I think the matte purple has such a beautiful, unique undertone to it. It's so blendable, so easy to work with. The red, the gold. This shade here is one of the most unique eyeshadows I've ever seen. It has this sort of like smoky, taupey base with a purple duochrome to it, and it is such a stunning and unique eyeshadow. I really, really love it. And then this shade over here is as close as you're going to get to her VR formula without really having to buy one of the big Mothership palettes. At number 10 I have my Dark Star eyeshadow palette from, again, Opulence 2018 collection. This is my favorite of the 6 pans that she came out for that holiday collection, because I just think this is such an interesting color story. I really, really like how all of these shades work together. This beautiful bluish, purplish shade, stunning. It just glows when you put it on your eyelids. This gold here is, again, I mean, I know, we know that Pat can do a sick gold. Somehow it really doesn't bother me that there are a champagne and a gold in this eyeshadow palette, because I think they just make it slightly different and give you more options when you're going to do looks, because you can do something like very cool toned if you use only these 3 shades, or you can do something very warm toned if you use these 3 shades over here. I just noticed actually that they are located like this, like little triangles. Another shade that I really enjoy in this palette is this beautiful black here. It is different from the blacks that she has in her big Mothership palettes. The big Mothership palettes have black shade always, well, not all of them, but like a lot of them have a black shade which has like a very matte finish to it, whereas this one, and I wasn't really aware of that until someone pointed it out, and I can't remember who it was, but this shade has the same type of formula that Natasha Denona has in her like cream to powder formula, so it's much easier to work with, it's extremely intense, it's very easy to blend out. I just really love using this shade. Sometimes if I want to use a black for whatever eye look, I'm going to pull out this palette just to use the black in this. Alright you guys, so we left things off at number 10 where we had the Dark Star palette. Moving into the top 10 eyeshadow palettes, you're going to see almost exclusively Mothership palettes, because you have to rank my Mothership palettes versus the rest of what Pat McGrath has done. The Mothership palettes will hold a special place in my heart. This is where my love for Pat McGrath truly, you know, blossoms into almost full-blown worshipping. So we're going to be talking about a bunch of Mothership palettes now. At the number 9 I have the Mothership VII Divine Rose 1 palette, which looks like this. I purchased this last year shortly after it came out. It made me feel a little bit like a fool because I actually said I wasn't going to buy this palette and then I went and bought it. The reason I initially didn't want to buy this palette is because it's so cool toned, and I had convinced myself that I don't look good in cool tones. I actually went on like a whole journey of discovering neutral cool tones, so you can check this video out here. It's Project 5 wears. I did actually, just FYI, I've done a bunch of Project 5 wears videos with the Mothership palettes that you're going to see, so I'm going to try to link as many of those as I can in the cards or in the description box below if you're curious or if you would like to get some inspiration. But to go back to the Divine Rose 1 palette, you're going to also hear me say this a lot. I love this palette, I enjoy this palette. I love this palette. I actually learned to really appreciate cool tones, and I think this is such a beautiful, approachable color story. If there's one palette I would recommend to people who are intimidated by the other Mothership palettes, I would say this is the one that you should go for, because it is so incredibly user-friendly. It's very subdued in terms of like the tones of this palette. There's no eyeshadow in here, which is truly intimidating because it's very vibrant or too colorful. All of these are so toned down. The only thing I would put down as a criticism for this palette, actually two things. One, there are a lot of repeat shades in here. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 repeat shades in this eyeshadow palette. This one's technically not a repeat shade because it comes from her highlighter trio, but if you happen to have the highlighter trio, it is a repeat shade for you. So I think for a 10 pan, it would have been nicer to not have repeat shades, but then again, I think something that all of us here in beauty YouTube should realize is that makeup companies don't make makeup for us, the small percentage of people who are obsessed with makeup. They make it for everyone, the general consumer. So when they think of color stories and how to put product together, they think about who they're targeting with their product and what they're trying to achieve. And I think Pat McGrath was trying to achieve reaching everyone with this eyeshadow palette. Why should she reinvent the wheel when she already has a bunch of eyeshadows that work just fine? So I get it. But that being said, for me as a collector of Pat McGrath, I don't want to call myself a collector because I don't collect her eyeshadow palettes. I love them and I use them. I buy all of them, but I also use all of them. Side note. So for me as someone who owns a lot of Pat McGrath palettes, of course this is a disadvantage, but I can imagine for a lot of other people they don't really give a shit because this is their only Pat McGrath Mothership palette. Anyway, the second criticism I have for this eyeshadow palette is this shade here. This is the shade VR Rose Venus. It is a stunning duochrome. It's like a cool toned pink with a greenish gold duochrome. Absolutely stunning. And the only thing I struggle with is that this shade is quite warm toned in its undertones and the rest of the shades don't really go very well with it. I've tried many times to make this shade work with the cool toned pink over here, but it just doesn't look that great. So I actually like to pair this particular eyeshadow from Divine Rose 1 with Divine Rose 2. I think VR Rose Venus just fits so perfectly into the Divine Rose 2 palette. At the number 8 we have the Mothership IV Decadence palette. Mine comes in this beautiful gold limited edition packaging. This is another eyeshadow palette that I really enjoy and is fairly new to my collection. Actually, it's the palette that you see me wearing on my lids for the most part today. I have this shade on my lid, this shade in my inner corners, this shade as a smoked liner in my lash line, and this shade on my lower lash line. I only added one additional shade to blend out everything in the crease. I really enjoy this eyeshadow palette, and while I believe you can absolutely use it as a standalone palette and just do complete looks with it, I do think of this palette for myself personally more as a palette of standout shades. So shades that I would pair with other eyeshadows from Pat McGrath or with other eyeshadow palettes from her, because these are all metallic shades. So they're not glittery, they're not matte, they're not satin. For the most part, I think only this blue shade over here would qualify as more of like a satin, but the rest of the shades have like a very metallic punch to them. And while you can work just fine with the metallic formula of Pat McGrath because her eyeshadow formula just blends out so beautifully on the lid and it looks so flattering even if you blend it through your crease, I personally, because of the combination of colors and how I feel about metallic shades, which I like to mostly put on my lid, just for me, I like to use this palette as a palette of standout shades, and there are so many standout shades in here. This silver is gorgeous. This gold is one of the most beautiful, vibrant, rich golds. This shade Lapis Luxury is it just goes on forever. It's so beautiful. This shade here, Divine Mink, is one of the most interesting shades that I've ever seen. It has this gorgeous, like cool, like slate blue undertone to it, and it has an overlay of like this smoky taupe. It's so incredibly gorgeous. This shade here, the shade Sinful, is so stunning and so unique. The shade here, the reddish bronze, so stunning. Just all of the shades in this palette are true stars. They're so beautiful. At number 7 we have the Mothership I Subliminal palette. Just FYI, I wanted to say that this cardboard packaging, the outer packaging of the Subliminal palette, happens to be one of my favorite like artworks that she has ever done on her outer packaging. I think it's such a masterpiece, so beautiful. This is the color story of the Subliminal palette. The Subliminal palette was one of the original 3 Mothership palettes that she released as a bundle back in 2016 or something. I really don't remember. I've purchased this palette much later, but I really enjoyed it. Such a beautiful, cool toned neutral palette with like beautiful rich pops of color, such as this blue, like this corner here of the special shades. All of these shades have such a beautiful texture to them. They're so transformative, they're so interesting. This is the more fun, adventurous sister of the Divine Rose palette, in the sense that it's a bit more cool toned again, because if you cover up these shades here, this is actually a really neutral cool toned palette. These 2 shades over here, they look like they're metallics, but they actually have more of that satin sheen to them, so they're very easy to use as like one and done shade. So you just swipe it on your lid, you blend it out around the edges, done and done. These 2 mattes over here are stunning. They have such a flattering neutral cool tone to them. Overall, I find this to be a very versatile eyeshadow palette, especially if you prefer neutrals and more like toned down looks, but you're willing to, you know, get out of your comfort zone every now and then and try something fun with the special shades over here in this corner. Moving on, at number 6 we have the actual Mothership VI. This is the Midnight Sun palette, which came out exactly a year ago. It looks like this. I absolutely love this eyeshadow palette. This was my favorite palette that was released last year, and I know that it was a bit more of a polarized release because a lot of people either loved it or really didn't like it. I personally am on the spectrum of people who really enjoyed this palette, because there are so many different things that you can do with it. There are so many interesting tones, so many interesting textures. I think this is a very versatile, very fall inspired palette. I'm curious whether those of you who also have a lot of Pat McGrath Mothership palettes would agree with me, but I do feel like the mattes in this particular palette and the subsequent releases have felt even creamier, even more rich, even more easy to blend than they were in her previous releases. If you like your color but you like to keep it more subdued and office friendly, Midnight Sun is the palette for you. And moving into the most exciting part, my top 5 Pat McGrath eyeshadow palettes. At the number 5 we have the Mothership V Bronze Seduction palette. Mine looks a little bit different, by the way, because it has the limited edition matte packaging. This is how this eyeshadow palette looks like. I love Bronze Seduction. It is such a stupid pretty palette. Okay, so beautiful. The corner here of the special shades is what I consider to be probably one of the most unique combination of colors that even Pat McGrath has pulled off in her palettes, because these eyeshadows are just almost impossible to dupe. Perhaps not in terms of their color, but definitely in terms of their texture. That's something that I would like to like stress and emphasize, that a lot of times when people talk about dupes of Pat McGrath's special shades, they're probably talking about color dupes and not really texture dupes, because in my humble opinion, no one has really come close in terms of texture to her special shades. I'm sorry, I think she has something unique going on with the special shades. This is my go-to palette when I have 5 minutes to do my makeup, but I still want to look extremely put together and as if I put a lot of effort into my makeup, because all I need to do is throw this shade in my crease, this shade in my outer corner, and then the shade VR Fire Opal on my lid. It looks like I put half an hour into my makeup, when in reality I just took a few minutes. It is just so easy to work with this eyeshadow palette. This is definitely meant for people who prefer more warm tones, and this is definitely one of the palettes that I used to recommend to people who are getting into Pat McGrath, because I think that while there are some poppy shades in here, this is also a very approachable eyeshadow palette, and because of the warmer tones, I think it's going to appeal to more people. And something super interesting. I don't know if you guys are watching this show on Netflix called Pose, which is about the LGBTQ community in the 80s and the beginning of voguing and the AIDS pandemic. But something really cool I noticed about this show is that I looked at the characters a couple of times, and there is especially one character in the show. Her name is Angel, and she is just absolutely stunning. But aside from the fact that she's stunning, she tends to wear always these beautiful, vibrant, colorful looks, and I was like, damn, I almost can bet that she's wearing Pat McGrath eyeshadows. And then lo and behold, when I searched for it, I found out that the makeup artists of the show actually use a lot of Pat McGrath makeup. And in one of the episodes, she was wearing this gorgeous, like, red smoky eye with a little bit of gold on the inner corners. And I'm not willing to bet too much money on it because I've been known to be wrong before, but I almost feel like she was wearing these two shades on her lids. And I actually want to do a video where I try to recreate that look because I was so inspired by it, and I want to use this palette for that. At number 4, I have Mother's newest Mothership palette release, and that is the Divine Rose II palette, which came out in the summer of 2020. You guys, I did not see this coming. When I purchased this palette, I thought I would really enjoy her, but I did not expect the obsession that followed. This eyeshadow palette epitomizes summer for me. There are so many bold, fun colors in here, but you can also take it a little bit more subdued. Like, this is not a palette that I would say you can really create like very neutral, office-friendly looks with, but at the same time, I think you can definitely tone it down if that's something that you prefer. But this is definitely not an eyeshadow palette that I would recommend if you don't like a little bit more poppy and vibrant colors, because most of the eyeshadows in here are actually pretty vibrant. Oh, this eyeshadow. The shade VIII Extraterrestrial. I know. It's a multi-chrome, and everyone is releasing multi-chrome things left and right. Natasha Denona just announced that she's releasing those liquid multi-chrome eyeshadows several years ago, actually, when Dawn Ice Cosmetics kind of was getting popular and introducing multi-chromes into the market, and I saw a lot of like people getting into them. I thought it's probably going to take us another 2-3 years before multi-chromes hit mainstream, and it is indeed like 2 or 3 years later that multi-chromes are finally finding their way to the mainstream community. But you know, that's only for the best. I really enjoy when things coming from indie finally hit the mainstream makeup community, because indie just always comes up with the coolest things. But anyway, the VIII Extraterrestrial shade, the thing I wanted to say about it, it has such a beautiful, easy to work with texture. Not only does it have different shifts that you don't have to struggle to find, but it is also incredibly easy to work with. This is a shade that I prefer to use as a one and done look. I don't really like to pair it too much with other shades because I feel like it's very difficult to pair the different shifts in it with something else, and I think the best way that it stands out is when it's on its own, but that's my personal opinion. However, the two shades that I have not been able to put my greedy hands away from are these two over here, the gold and the bronzy orange shade. I've worn these shades to death this summer. I think at least once a week I throw this in my crease, this on my lid, this on the outer corner, and this in my inner corner, and like a little bit as a topper for everything. And it's the most beautiful, fresh, vibrant summer look you can ever imagine. And we are at the top 3. Look who made its way to the top 3. This is the Astral Quad in Iconic Illumination that was released again for Opulence 2019. You're probably very surprised to see one of the quads at such a high ranking position on my Pat McGrath ranking list, but I've spoken about this eyeshadow palette before, and I've indicated on so many different occasions how much I love this eyeshadow palette. I adore this relatively neutral eyeshadow quad because every time I do a neutral look with it, it always turns out really, really stunning. I can just throw this on my lid and then top it off with this and just have like a super easy, no fuss look. I can add this to my outer corners if I want to smoke it out a bit. I can do something different if I want to throw in the burgundy shade. It's just only 4 shades and so much versatility. And this particular topper over here happens to be one of my absolute favorite topper shades from Pat McGrath. It's like this slight champagne shade which has a little bit of like these warm tones to it without leaning too gold or too silver, and it just looks so stunning on the lid. I absolutely love Iconic Illumination, highly recommend it. At number 2 we have the Mothership III Subversive palette, which was one of the 3 original Mothership palettes that she released. This is a relatively old palette, but it remains at one of the top positions on my list because it is a stunning eyeshadow palette with some of the most stunning colors and textures in it. Subversive is such a gorgeous smoky eyeshadow palette. It's not meant to be like your everyday office friendly eyeshadow palette. This is definitely meant to be a super smoky, super sultry eyeshadow palette, which gives you so much versatility, so much different tones to the shades, and I'll fight you if you tell me that there's anything that even comes close to this shade over here, which is called Gigabyte. It is one of the most beautiful antique bronzy gold shades with the most beautiful like sparkle to it. I have not come across an eyeshadow that comes even in the vicinity of Gigabyte. It is so stunning. This is one of her VR shades, which have the most beautiful texture, the most beautiful shine, and the most beautiful duochrome to them. This shade is stunning, like the purpley blue duochrome. This shade over here, so beautiful. It's just, I can continue and be on and on about how every shade in this palette is really beautiful. Of course, not all of them are created equally, like the more neutral shades are leave it or take it, but as a combination I really love this color story, and I love how smoky and sultry the eyeshadow looks that I create with it always come out. And to no one's surprise really, at the number one we have the Mothership II Sublime palette. My first foray into Pat McGrath makeup remains my favorite eyeshadow palette. At this point I find it very difficult to be very objective about this eyeshadow palette. I feel like a part of me will always rank it first because I have such an emotional attachment to it, but at the same time, every time I use it, I still think, well damn, what a beautiful, versatile, interesting eyeshadow palette. There are several reasons why I will continue to rank this eyeshadow palette first. First of all, because it houses a green eyeshadow, one of the most beautiful forest greens ever, and if you guys didn't know that about me, I think green is pretty much my favorite color when it comes to eyeshadow, and not just eyeshadow, generally speaking. The second reason I rank this eyeshadow palette first is because it still contains two of my favorite Pat McGrath eyeshadows, which are obviously the green shade and this shade over here, the shade VR Nectar. VR Nectar is one of those shades that I actively sometimes have to stop myself from using because I don't want to hit pan on it. I can't even describe to you how beautiful this eyeshadow is. I want to bathe in it. It's so gorgeous. The texture, the shift, the sparkle, the shine, everything about it is sheer perfection. One of my favorite like easy looks to do with this eyeshadow palette is just throw this orangey shade all over my lid, blend it through the crease, then deepen a slight bit with this brown shade over here, and then throw VR Nectar all over my lid. And it just looks so stunning, like I put so much effort into my makeup. To conclude, I am in love with this eyeshadow palette. She still holds a special place in my heart and she's still my absolute number one. Anywho, I think we should wrap this video up because I think future me is going to have a really good time having to edit this video. I think I have about an hour of footage and I want this video to be no longer than 20 to 25 minutes, so good luck, Maria. I hope you guys enjoyed this ranking of my Pat McGrath eyeshadow palettes. If you would like to hear more rambles about Pat McGrath, then don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!